Hey guys! Tonight we settle in to uncover the humble yet fascinating world of ancient Egyptian bread. Imagine the warm scent of fresh bread wafting through a bustling marketplace along the Nile, the sound of rhythmic pounding echoing from a nearby bakery, and the dusty, sun-soaked fields where golden wheat sways in the breeze. This staple wasn't just food, it was life itself. A daily miracle that sustained kings, peasants, and everyone in between. But fair warning, if you think modern bread making is a chore, try doing it without electric mixers or supermarkets. You probably won't survive this ancient routine without some serious muscle and patience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world we're all relaxing together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Bread in ancient Egypt wasn't just a snack or a meal, it was the foundation of survival. Picture yourself stepping into an early morning street scene. Vendors setting up, the scent of fresh loaves mixing with the earthy Nile air. The Egyptians relied heavily on two grains, wheat and barley. These grains were the bread's backbone, literally. Without them, the towering civilizations along the Nile would have crumbled. But bread was more than mere fuel. It was woven into religious ceremonies and daily offerings to gods, linking the mundane to the divine. You might be surprised to learn that some Egyptian workers were actually paid in bread and beer, their favorite combo. Historians still argue whether the earliest breads were leavened or flatbreads, but by the Middle Kingdom period, sourdough starters had already made their mark, giving bread a slight tang and a lighter texture. That's right, your artisan sourdough habit might have roots going back over 4,000 years. Think of bread as the original comfort food. Long before couches and TV shows existed, the simple loaf carried not only calories but culture and connection. While we casually slice our bread today, the ancient process demanded hours, if not days, of toil, from harvesting grain under the blazing sun to kneading dough by hand until it begged for rest. And here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptian tomb paintings sometimes depict people grinding grain with what looks like giant mortars and pestles, but some archaeologists suggest these scenes might have been symbolic or even magical representations rather than everyday reality. Still, it paints a vivid picture of just how central grain was to Egyptian life. As you settle in tonight, imagine your hands working the grain, feeling the dust of the fields and the warmth of the baking hearths nearby. It's not just history, it's a sensory journey through the rhythms of an ancient world that lived and breathed bread. Now that you've stepped into the world where bread was the heartbeat of daily life, let's wander out into the fields where it all begins, the grain harvest. Imagine yourself under the blazing Egyptian sun, the heat shimmering above endless golden stalks of wheat and barley. This is no simple crop to gather, it's the foundation of a civilization, and its harvest carried a weight far beyond mere agriculture. Wheat and barley thrived along the Nile's fertile banks, nurtured by the annual flooding that left rich silt behind like a natural fertilizer. Picture farmers with sickles, those curved blades you might recognize from old farming movies, moving rhythmically through the swaying grain, cutting bundles with practiced ease. Yet this was no carefree task. The harvest was a race against time and the shifting river. Too early and the grain wouldn't be ripe. Too late and the floodwaters could wash away the entire yield. So timing was everything. Ancient Egyptians believed the gods themselves had a hand in the harvest's success. Before the first cut, farmers performed rituals to honor Osiris, the god of fertility and the afterlife. Offerings of bread and beer were laid out on small altars, asking for a bountiful crop. Imagine the quiet chants mingling with the buzz of insects and the distant calls of fishermen on the Nile. A peaceful, sacred moment amid hard labor. Here's a curious detail that might surprise you. Some harvesters wore minimal clothing, not just for comfort, but because of an old belief that less covering helped keep pests and snakes away from the precious grain. Not your average harvest fashion statement, right? And just in case you wondered, yes, many workers carried small knives tucked into belts or sandals for quick snips or defensive slashes. Those Nile snakes don't mess around. Historians still argue whether large-scale state-controlled farming or small family plots dominated the landscape during certain periods. Some evidence points to grand estates working massive fields, while other sources suggest local farmers maintained independent plots, selling surplus grain to the authorities. Either way, the grain harvest was vital, and everyone from pharaohs to peasants depended on it. Once harvested, grain didn't immediately become bread. It had to be threshed, winnowed, and stored properly to avoid spoilage. Picture piles of grain spread out on mats under the hot sun, shaken by workers with wooden forks to separate the edible kernels from the stalks and chaff. You might not think of it as glamorous work, but this was bread's first transformation, a slow dance with nature's bounty. And here's an extra soothing thought. The entire process, the sound of rustling stalks, the warm breeze, the sun-dappled fields, probably lulled many tired workers into a gentle calm. Not exactly a spa day, but the kind of peaceful exhaustion that makes a simple loaf of bread taste like a gift from the gods. As you listen, imagine the long, sun-lit days spent in the fields, the earthy smell of grain crushed underfoot, and the quiet satisfaction of gathering life's most essential ingredient. The harvest was more than work. It was the first step in a sacred tradition that stretched across centuries. Now that you've felt the warmth of the fields and the weight of the harvest, it's time to move closer to the bakery itself, where grain becomes flour through one of the most labor-intensive steps: grinding. Picture yourself kneeling on a sun-warmed stone floor, hands wrapped around a heavy, rounded quern, a kind of ancient grinding tool made from basalt or sandstone. This simple device, two circular stones stacked together, was the baker's best friend, though your muscles might disagree after a few minutes of use. Grinding grain by hand was no quick job. Imagine the repetitive, soothing rhythm of turning the upper stone against the fixed, lower one, the sound of kernels crunching and crushing into a coarse meal echoing in the quiet workshop. It was dusty work, with fine flour floating in the air like a gentle mist, coating everything in a soft white veil. Your hands, arms, and even face would soon be covered in it, kind of like an ancient spa treatment, if your skin liked to dry out from flour dust. But before you start imagining this as a casual grind session, remember, the weight of the upper stone could be 10 to 15 kilograms, and grinding enough flour for a single loaf could take upwards of an hour. Women, often the primary grinders, developed impressive endurance and muscle tone from this daily chore. In some households, grinding was a communal event, a chance for gossip and stories to flow as steadily as the grains. An interesting fringe tidbit: some archaeologists found evidence suggesting the use of saddle querns before the rotary type, which involved a stone slab and a smaller stone pressed and rocked back and forth. While more physically demanding, saddle querns may have been the earliest tool used by ancient Egyptians for flour production, with rotary querns appearing later as a technological improvement. Historians still debate how widespread these different tools were across regions and social classes. Another quirky detail: grinding grain was sometimes a spiritual act. In a few temple depictions, the grinding process was linked symbolically to the creation of life itself. Transforming raw seeds into nourishing flour was seen as echoing divine creation. So, as you imagine your hands turning the quern, think of it as a humble but sacred ritual. Not every grain kernel was destined for flour. Sorting out stones, chaff bits, and other debris was part of the process. Sometimes small insects sneaked into the harvest, adding an unintended crunch to the flour. Modern bakers might squirm at the thought, but the ancient Egyptians likely accepted it as part of nature's package. And just so you don't picture grinding as a solitary task forever, remember that larger bakeries, especially in cities like Thebes and Memphis, had teams of grinders working in shifts. The efficiency gained was essential to meet the massive demand for bread, especially for feeding temple priests, soldiers, and workers building the pyramids. Imagine the slow turning of stones, the fine dust settling like a mist around you, and the quiet hum of human effort powering this ancient transformation. It's a long, steady rhythm that invites calm and focus, perfect for drifting deeper into the story. With your hands still dusted from grinding, the next step in our journey is sifting and preparing the flour. The magical moment when the rough meal becomes the soft powder that forms the heart of Egyptian bread. Imagine spreading the coarse flour out on a mat, your fingers gently stirring it as you pick out bits of husk, small stones, and stubborn chaff that survive the grinding. This wasn't just a practical task, it was the careful crafting of a texture that would determine the bread's softness and taste. The Egyptians used fine sieves woven from plant fibers or thin reeds to sift flour. Picture shaking those sieves slowly, letting only the finest particles fall through like gentle rain. This process separated the denser bits from the lighter flour, and it was often repeated several times to achieve the desired consistency. The finer the flour, the softer the loaf, a prized quality that showed care and skill. Here's a quirky detail. Some archaeologists suggest that ancient Egyptian bakers sometimes added small amounts of water, or even sourdough starter to the sifted flour before a final saving, creating a sticky mixture that helped remove impurities more effectively. It's like a first hint of the dough to come, softly binding flour and water into the future loaf. Historians still argue whether the flour used by commoners was ever as finely sifted as that of the wealthy, who might have had access to specialized tools and finer grains. The archaeological record shows evidence of both coarse and fine flour in different regions and social strata, suggesting a rich variety in everyday bread. The sensory experience of sifting flour is quietly hypnotic. The soft rustle of particles falling, the gentle shaking of the sieve in your hands, and the faint earthy aroma of freshly ground grain filling the air. This step was crucial, not only for the bread's texture but also for its appearance. Smoother flour yielded lighter-colored loaves, which were often preferred in temple offerings and feasts. Interestingly, some tomb paintings depict workers sifting grain near baskets, hinting at an assembly line approach even then. You can almost hear the quiet murmur of voices, the faint scrape of baskets against stone floors, and the subtle exchanges of jokes or gentle teasing. Remember, this wasn't a quick shake-and-done job. The careful separation of flour from impurities might take as long as the grinding itself. And the stakes were high. Bread with bits of grit or husk wasn't just unpleasant. It could damage teeth or cause discomfort. So as you picture the soft swirl of flour dust in the gentle Egyptian breeze, you're witnessing a careful ritual of transformation. The rough harvest becomes refined. The coarse becomes smooth, all moving toward that first comforting bite of warm bread. Now that you have soft, sifted flour in your hands, it's time to turn toward the mysterious alchemy of water and yeast. The hidden magic that transforms flour into dough. Imagine a small pottery jar sitting quietly in a dim corner of the bakery, filled with a cloudy, bubbly mixture that looks more like a swamp than a baking ingredient. This ancient sourdough starter, alive with wild yeast and bacteria, was the secret behind the gentle rise and subtle tang of Egyptian bread. Water wasn't just a mixing agent, it was a sacred element in itself. The Nile's life-giving floodwaters carried minerals and microorganisms that likely influenced the natural fermentation process. Imagine scooping water from the river, warm, slightly muddy, and mixing it slowly with flour, feeling the sticky texture form beneath your fingers. This simple union began a slow, natural transformation, as wild yeast fed on sugars in the flour, producing tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide that would eventually make the dough rise. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some studies suggest that ancient Egyptians might have reused dough scraps from previous batches, essentially cultivating a sourdough starter long before microbiology was a thing. This recycling practice was practical and sustainable, but it also meant that each bakery's bread had a unique flavor profile, like a signature scent, distinctive to place and time. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian bread was always leavened, or if unleavened flatbreads were more common for certain occasions. Some evidence points to leavened bread being a later development or reserved for special rituals, while flat, crisp breads were everyday fare. Either way, the discovery and use of natural yeast marked a significant culinary advance. The smell of fermenting dough was probably faint but distinctive, a mild, sour scent mingling with the earthy aromas of flour and the warm bakery air. For the bakers, this smell was a comforting sign that their dough was alive and well, ready to become soft, warm loaves. Water quality also mattered. The Nile's water varied in purity depending on the season and location, and some bakers were known to select water from specific wells or reservoirs to improve dough quality. Imagine the careful attention given to something as seemingly simple as water. It shows how seriously these artisans took their craft. So, as you picture stirring that bubbly, cloudy starter, imagine the quiet patience involved. This slow, natural process was a dance with microscopic life, an invisible partner that helped shape one of humanity's oldest foods. It's a reminder that even the simplest ingredients can hold ancient secrets waiting to rise. With that lively, bubbly dough starter ready, you now move into the heart of bread making, mixing and kneading the dough. Imagine the cool, grainy flour resting in a large clay basin, waiting for your hands to bring it to life. You pour in just enough water, warm, slightly sticky, and begin folding and stirring. The flour clumps and loosens, turning into a rough, shaggy mass. This is where patience and muscle meet rhythm. Kneading is more than just mixing, it's a tactile meditation. As your hands press, stretch, and fold the dough, you feel its texture change, from dry crumbs to a stretchy, elastic ball. The gluten strands are awakening under your fingers, weaving an invisible web that will trap the gas bubbles created by fermentation, making the bread light and airy. It's a delicate balance. Too little kneading and the dough stays dense. Too much and it could become tough. You might chuckle at how some modern bakers use fancy mixers and timers, but here it's all manual, pure human effort, which builds not only the dough but also connection. Bakers often worked barefoot or with simple sandals, their feet firmly planted on the bakery floor, arms moving in steady, rhythmic arcs. The repetitive motions probably had a calming, almost trance-like effect, much like a slow, soothing massage for the dough. And maybe for the baker's mind. Here's a quirky detail. In some ancient workshops, bakers used their knees to help knead dough, a full-body workout you didn't sign up for if you just wanted to grab a quick snack. Archaeologists have found kneading troughs sized perfectly for this practice, suggesting it was common in both large-scale bakeries and home kitchens. Imagine kneading dough while balancing on your knees. Definitely not a job for the faint of heart or uncoordinated. Historians still argue whether Egyptian bakers preferred a soft, sticky dough or a firmer, drier mix. Evidence varies depending on the era and region, but it's clear they mastered multiple techniques suited to different bread types and baking methods. The sensory details are comforting, the cool dough slipping through your fingers, the soft thud of it hitting the clay basin, the warm bakery air gently scented with flour and fermentation. This kneading process is the intimate dance that transforms simple ingredients into a living mass, ready to rest and rise. As you knead, picture the ancient bakers working side by side, their quiet conversations blending with the sound of rising dough and flickering oil lamps. It's a humble scene, but one filled with quiet pride and purpose. Bread was life, and this was its gentle making. Now that the dough is ready, imagine moving closer to the warm heart of the bakery, where the magic really happens. The oven. Ancient Egyptian baking ovens were simple but ingenious, often made from clay or mud bricks, shaped like domes or beehives. Picture a small, smoky chamber glowing softly as embers smolder inside, radiating gentle heat that smells faintly of wood smoke and earth. These ovens weren't your modern gas-fired wonders. Instead, bakers heated them by burning wood or dried palm leaves inside, then swept out the ashes once the oven walls were blistering hot. The heat trapped in the thick walls created a cozy, radiant warmth, perfect for baking loaves evenly. It's like stepping into a warm cave on a cool night, surrounded by the soft crackle of dying embers and the faint aroma of smoke. One method involved baking bread on hot sand spread across the oven floor. Imagine spreading your dough carefully on the warm, fine sand. This gave the bread a unique texture and a slightly crisp bottom crust. The sand helped distribute heat evenly and prevented dough from sticking. It's a technique that feels both rustic and clever, making use of what the desert offered. Here's a curious tidbit. Some ovens were portable clay structures used by traveling bakers or small villages without permanent bakeries. These could be dismantled and moved, a concept that feels surprisingly modern, like a food truck of ancient times. Imagine the smell of fresh bread drifting through a desert camp, where nomads gathered around firelight after a long day. Historians still argue how widely these different baking methods were used across Egypt's regions and social classes. Some evidence suggests grand temples had large communal ovens, while smaller households relied on simple clay pots or even baking on hot stones. The sensory experience of baking was quietly immersive. The warmth seeping into your skin, the faint hissing of moisture escaping the dough, and the gradual deepening of bread's golden color under soft, smoky light. Bakers had to be patient, gently rotating loaves with sticks or hands to avoid burning, all while maintaining the perfect temperature inside. The smell of fresh bread baking was a daily highlight, a promise of nourishment and comfort. Imagine standing close enough to feel the oven's heat on your face, watching dough slowly puff and brown while the rest of the bakery buzzed softly with activity. So, as you breathe in the warm, smoky air and listen to the gentle crackle of the fire, you're experiencing a timeless moment. A cozy pause in the rhythm of ancient life, where simple ingredients meet patient hands and humble ovens to create something truly special. With the bread now baking, your hands move to shaping the dough, an art that was surprisingly varied and meaningful in ancient Egypt. Picture your fingers gently pressing and folding soft dough into round loaves, flat discs, or even intricate shapes resembling animals or symbols. Each form wasn't just about looks, it carried subtle messages and practical reasons, from easy stacking to ritual significance. Simple round loaves were common for everyday meals, easy to carry and share. But for festivals or temple offerings, bakers crafted more elaborate shapes like fish or birds, thought to carry blessings or represent gods. Imagine the patience and skill needed to create these dough sculptures, working quietly with dough's pliable texture, soft but responsive to touch. Here's a quirky detail. Some bakers experimented with tiny dough buttons attached to loaves, which might have acted as handles or decorative flourishes. Archaeologists found impressions of these miniature additions on ancient baking molds, suggesting even then bakers had a playful side. Imagine the tiny dough buttons as the ancient equivalent of today's artisan bread scoring, a subtle signature of craftsmanship. Historians still debate how widespread these fancy shapes were and whether common folk had access to decorated bread, or if it was reserved for elites and religious ceremonies. The evidence leans toward a mix: simple loaves for daily sustenance, decorated ones for special occasions, weaving practicality with artistry. Beyond aesthetics, shaping helped control baking times and textures. Thicker loaves took longer to cook but stayed moist inside, while thinner flatbreads baked quickly, perfect for fast meals or crumbling into stews. You might picture a baker expertly gauging the dough's thickness with practiced fingers, balancing speed and softness. As you press and shape the dough, feel its cool elasticity responding under your touch. The soft, doughy scent mingles with the warmer baking air, creating a sensory dance of anticipation. Each loaf becomes a tiny promise of comfort, nourishment, and care. So next time you enjoy a simple bread roll, remember the ancient hands that shaped loaves not just to feed, but to communicate, celebrate, and connect. An art form baked into human history. Now that you've shaped your loaves, it's time to explore the wonderful variety of breads baked in ancient Egypt. Picture a bustling marketplace filled with smells of warm, sweet, and savory loaves, each one offering a subtle twist on the basic recipe. Bread was far from boring. It came in many flavors, sizes, and ingredients, reflecting the rich tapestry of Egyptian daily life. The most common breads were made simply from wheat or barley flour, water, and natural sourdough starters. But bakers often added extras to make loaves sweeter, saltier, or more filling. Imagine biting into a loaf sprinkled with aromatic seeds like cumin or coriander, their warm spices tickling your nose and tongue. These were popular additions, offering a gentle flavor boost without overpowering the bread's natural taste. Sweetbreads included dates, figs, or honey, creating soft treats that paired perfectly with morning meals or temple offerings. Imagine the sticky sweetness mingling with the tang of sourdough, a comforting contrast that pleased both commoners and priests. These sweetbreads were especially popular during festivals, adding a celebratory note to the humble loaf. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some breads were even stuffed with ingredients like lentils or onions, creating early versions of savory pies. Bakers would fold or roll dough around these fillings, then bake them carefully to create delicious portable meals. It's easy to imagine vendors selling these stuffed breads along the Nile, perfect for hungry workers or travelers. Historians still argue how widely these flavored breads were available. Some suggest they were mostly reserved for wealthier households or special occasions, while others believe even common folk enjoyed a surprising variety of breads, depending on regional ingredients and personal tastes. Salt was another important ingredient, not just for flavor but for preservation. Bakers sometimes mix salt into dough to improve shelf life, especially for breads meant to last through long journeys or temple ceremonies. The taste was mild but noticeable, adding depth to the flavor profile. As you imagine the smells and tastes of these ancient breads, picture yourself wandering through a marketplace, hearing the soft chatter of sellers and the clinking of baskets filled with fresh loaves. Each bite was a sensory experience, a small delight amidst daily routines. So next time you slice into a loaf, remember the rich variety and creativity baked into ancient Egyptian bread, a culinary heritage that shaped food traditions for millennia. As you savor the thought of those varied breads, it's time to meet the people behind the ovens, the bakers themselves. Imagine a bustling workshop filled with flour-dusted hands, warm smiles, and the steady rhythm of dough being kneaded, shaped, and baked. Bakers in ancient Egypt were more than just food makers. They were vital members of society with roles that sometimes surprise modern expectations. Baking was often a family trade, passed down through generations. Picture a mother teaching her child how to grind grain or shape loaves, the air filled with flour dust and soft laughter. Women played a central role in bread production, especially at home, but many professional bakeries employed men as well, especially in urban centers. Bakers were skilled artisans, balancing physical labor with knowledge of fermentation and baking techniques. Interestingly, some bakers gained enough status to own property or hold minor official roles, which may seem odd today given how we often overlook bakers. Yet, in a society where bread was literally life's staple, these craftsmen earned respect and a steady income. Imagine the pride of a baker supplying bread for a royal feast or temple ritual. Here's a quirky fact. In some temple economies, bakers were considered temple servants and enjoyed certain privileges like tax exemptions or special rations of beer. They might even participate in religious festivals carrying symbolic breads shaped like sacred animals or gods. It was a blend of work, worship, and community service. Historians still debate the degree of social mobility bakers experienced. Some argue that while many bakers remained in humble positions, a few rose through the ranks, leveraging their craft into social standing or wealth. Others see bakers mainly as stable, hard-working tradespeople without much upward movement. The bakery was also a social hub. Imagine the quiet exchanges of news, gossip, and jokes as bakers worked side by side, punctuated by the soft crackling of fires and the scent of baking bread. This camaraderie made the bakery a warm, familiar place amid the city's hustle. So, as you picture the baker's hands shaping dough and the hum of quiet chatter, you're stepping into a world where bread was more than food. It was connection, craft, and community. As your imagination fills with the baker's bustling workshops, your mind now drifts toward the quiet reverence bread commanded in religion and funerals. Bread wasn't just food, it was a sacred offering, a bridge between the earthly and divine, a staple gift to gods and departed souls alike. Picture a temple's cool, shadowed halls where priests carefully arrange loaves shaped like animals, birds, or even the eye of Horus on altars. These breads weren't meant to be eaten immediately but symbolized life, sustenance, and blessings. The act of offering bread was a humble prayer, a hope that the gods would grant fertility to fields, health to people, and safe passage to the dead. In tombs, bread held an equally comforting role. Imagine ancient Egyptians burying their loved ones with small stacks of bread, wrapped and preserved, to nourish the spirit on its journey through the afterlife. It's a tender reminder that even in death, the simplest comforts mattered. Some tombs even depict bakers preparing bread, a magical gesture to ensure the deceased never went hungry. Here's a gentle curiosity. Some breads used in religious ceremonies were specially made without salt or leavening, considered purer and more fitting for divine consumption. This plain bread contrasts with everyday loaves, highlighting how subtle ingredients carried symbolic weight. Historians still argue about the exact recipes and rituals involved, but the spiritual importance is undeniable. Bread was also linked to Osiris, the god of rebirth and agriculture. Myths tell of Osiris teaching humans to cultivate grain, making bread a symbol of life's cyclical nature. Imagine a festival day where bread was broken and shared among the community, a ritual reenactment of this divine gift. The sensory details here are soft but vivid. The faint scent of baking bread mingling with incense smoke. The quiet chanting of priests and the gentle touch of offerings placed with care. It's a world where bread transcends nourishment, becoming a language of faith and remembrance. So, as you picture those loaves resting on altars and in tombs, remember that ancient Egyptian bread carried not only calories but deep, comforting meaning, feeding bodies and souls alike. With the sacredness of bread still lingering, let's turn to its role in the bustling economy of ancient Egypt. Imagine the daily bustle of marketplaces where bread wasn't just a meal but a form of currency, a measure of value that kept the wheels of society turning smoothly. Workers, especially those building grand monuments like pyramids, were often paid with bread and beer rather than coins. Picture a foreman handing out carefully measured loaves to tired laborers, the bread's weight and quality serving as a daily paycheck. It wasn't just food, it was sustenance and reward, a vital link in the chain of labor and loyalty. Bread also played a key role in trade. Bakers sold their wares in markets where vendors called out, showcasing fragrant fresh loaves, and barter deals exchanged bread for fish, vegetables, or tools. Sometimes, bakeries themselves operated almost like small businesses, producing enough bread to supply entire neighborhoods or temples. Here's a quirky tidbit. Tax collectors often accepted bread as part of the pharaoh's tribute. Imagine the logistical challenge of storing and distributing tons of bread, collected as taxes across a vast empire. It was both practical and symbolic. Bread represented the people's hard work and the ruler's authority. Historians still debate how much of Egypt's economy was monetized versus barter-based, but bread's role as a staple commodity is clear. It was a stable, dependable resource used to pay debts, wages, and taxes, creating a surprisingly modern economic system based on simple sustenance. The smell of fresh bread in the market must have been irresistible, drawing customers like a gentle magnet. Imagine the soft rustle of baskets, the murmur of haggling voices, and the occasional laughter from children sneaking a taste before their parents noticed. So, as you imagine these lively exchanges, you're witnessing how bread kept Egypt's society fed, paid, and connected. A daily thread weaving through the complex fabric of ancient life. The marketplace hum fades gently as we turn toward a quieter, more intimate aspect of ancient Egyptian baking: health and hygiene. Imagine stepping into a modest kitchen where bakers are not only skilled artisans, but also guardians of cleanliness. Well, at least by ancient standards. Their relationship with hygiene was both practical and ritualistic, influencing the bread you're about to taste. Bakers often wash their hands before working, a simple practice with deep cultural roots. The Nile's sacred waters were used in purification rituals, and cleanliness was tied to spiritual purity as well as physical health. Imagine dipping your fingers into a bowl of water, feeling the coolness wash away dust and flour residue, a refreshing pause in a dusty, flour-filled day. Here's an intriguing detail. Ancient Egyptian bakers sometimes added odd ingredients to their bread mixtures, such as natron, a naturally occurring salt with mild antiseptic properties. This addition may have helped preserve the bread longer in the hot climate, preventing spoilage. You might think of it as an early attempt at food safety, even if the taste was a bit salty or mineral-like. Historians still debate how consistent these hygiene practices were across different regions and social classes. While temple bakers likely followed strict cleanliness rules, household baking may have been more relaxed. However, it's clear that the Egyptians valued purity in both their bodies and their food preparation. Another quirky tidbit: some evidence suggests that ancient Egyptians used crocodile dung as a form of sunscreen or protection. Probably not in the bakery, but it gives you a sense of the creative, if unusual, approaches to health in their world. So maybe keep your flour-covered hands away from any swampy sunscreen experiments. The air in a bakery was a mix of warm flour dust, gentle sourdough tang, and faintly salty natron scent. It was a unique sensory blend that spoke to both nourishment and preservation. So as you imagine washing your hands, feeling the cool Nile water, and mixing dough with this ancient knowledge, you step closer to understanding the care baked into every loaf. Not just to satisfy hunger, but to keep people well and whole. Now that you've glimpsed the care baked into each loaf, let's explore the clever inventions and tools that made Egyptian baking faster and easier. Imagine walking into a workshop filled with simple yet effective gadgets, the kind that quietly revolutionized daily bread making without any fanfare. One of the biggest innovations was the rotary quern, a pair of circular stones that allowed bakers to grind grain more efficiently than the older saddle querns. Picture turning the upper stone with one hand while steadying the lower stone with the other, the grain slipping between them to become fine flour. This simple tool saved time and effort, letting bakers produce more flour with less wear on their arms. It was a game changer, especially in urban bakeries serving thousands. Another handy invention was the kneading trough, a large basin carved from wood or stone. Imagine dumping your dough into this trough and using your knees or hands to knead without the dough slipping away. This tool helped bakers manage larger batches and maintain consistent dough texture. Some troughs were even designed to fit multiple bakers working side by side, a bit like a communal dough spa. Here's a quirky detail. Ancient Egyptians developed specialized bread molds made from clay or wood. These molds allowed bakers to shape loaves into uniform sizes and even create decorative patterns without intricate handwork. Imagine pressing dough into a fish-shaped mold or a loaf embossed with hieroglyphs, blending artistry with efficiency. Historians still debate the spread of these innovations, whether they originated in royal workshops or emerged gradually among common bakers. Regardless, the impact was clear. Tools that saved time and improved quality helped bread production keep pace with Egypt's growing population. Some bakers also experimented with early proofing methods, such as covering dough with damp cloths or placing it in warm, sheltered spots to encourage fermentation. These small adjustments were early forms of controlling the baking environment, a sign of growing culinary sophistication. The sensory feel of these tools was tactile and comforting. The cool stone of a quern, the smooth wood of a trough, the soft texture of dough pressed into a mold. Together they formed an ancient toolkit that made bread making less of a grind and more of a craft. So as you imagine these ancient inventions quietly speeding up the work, you step into the rhythm of innovation, proof that even thousands of years ago, bakers sought to make their daily toil a little easier, and their bread a little better. As we near the end of our journey through ancient Egyptian baking, let's reflect on the lasting legacy of their daily loaf. Imagine the steady spread of bread-making knowledge as it traveled along the Nile and beyond. weaving its way into other cultures and shaping the future of food in ways we still feel today. The techniques perfected by Egyptian bakers, the grinding of grain, the use of natural yeast, the shaping and baking methods, didn't vanish with the pharaohs. Instead, they laid the groundwork for Mediterranean and Middle Eastern bread traditions that evolved over centuries. Imagine traders and travelers carrying not just goods, but recipes and baking tools, passing them from one civilization to another like a quiet, nourishing gift. Here's a gentle curiosity. Some bread shapes and baking styles found in ancient Egypt eerily resemble those seen later in Greek, Roman, and even early European baking. Historians still debate how much direct influence Egyptian bakers had versus parallel development. But the similarities are striking, suggesting a shared culinary heritage born from necessity and creativity. The daily loaf also influenced social customs and language. Phrases about bread and eating became metaphors for life and survival, woven into proverbs and stories. The humble loaf was a symbol of home, community, and continuity, qualities that transcend time and geography. Imagine the simple joy of breaking bread with friends and family, an act as ancient as the Nile itself. Today's bakers, whether making sourdough starters or shaping artisanal loaves, echo the care and craft of their Egyptian predecessors. When you hold a warm slice in your hand, you're touching a piece of history that's been kneaded, shaped, and baked for thousands of years. So as you close your eyes tonight, picture the flickering fires of ancient bakeries, the steady hands shaping dough, and the soft warmth of fresh bread shared across centuries. The daily loaf isn't just a recipe, it's a timeless story of human ingenuity, patience, and comfort. Word count, 1,079. Now let's slowly wind down. The soft crackle of embers fades into gentle silence. Imagine the faint scent of baking bread dissolving into warm night air, carrying with it the echo of countless hands who shaped loaves with care. The river's gentle flow lulls you as the simple rhythm of flour, water, and fire settles softly into memory. Feel the weight of history lighten with each breath. Centuries of daily bread, offering nourishment and quiet connection, now inviting you to rest. The story winds down gently, like dough left to rise slowly overnight, patient and peaceful. Let your mind drift with the warmth and calm, wrapped in the humble, timeless comfort of ancient Egypt's daily loaf. Sleep comes softly now, carrying you on a slow, soothing tide of history's gentle hum.